Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the articles, if you don't already know, the articles and the research that I've been doing as of late, but also a lot of other things that are going on in the world as well. You should know that I'm a writer for Activist Post at activistpost.com. That's where I write all of my articles, actually. And if you want to follow my work, you should just be going to that website, activistpost.com, and checking the home page for my articles as they come out. That's where they will be posted first. If you don't see any of my work on the Activist Post homepage, you can always go to the Contributors tab, click on that link, and find my name under the staff writers that's provided there. You find my name, and it'll have a list of articles that I've done recently, and you can click on those articles, or you can click on my name and it'll take you to a page of my more recent work and some articles archived from the past. If you want to go to brandonturbeville.blogspot.com, I repost all of my articles there, all of my interviews that I do, and the rebroadcasts of Truth on the Tracks, as well as some other things. You can go there to check on my work specifically, but bear in mind that it's not updated necessarily as my work comes out. It's updated a few days sometimes after the work has been put out on the Activist Post or after the interview has been done. I'm also the author of 4 books, and you can find those books at thebookpatch.com by searching my name or searching the title, Codex, Alimentarius, The End of Health Freedom, 5 Cent Solution, 7 Real Conspiracies, and Dispatches from a Dissident, Volume 1. You can also find my books at falseflagpublications.blogspot.com. I have a link to all 4 books with a Buy Now button at the top and bottom of the page and a picture of the cover of the book for your convenience. You can purchase them there. It'll take you directly to the store. So tonight we're going to cover first an issue of a more local variety for me as it relates to South Carolina and particularly Marion County, but it'll be beneficial for you as the listeners, thankfully, to hear this information because it's going to relate to your area as well, because you're seeing this stuff pop up all across the country. And this is an article entitled Text-to-Tip Snitch Program Invades Small Town America. And it shows you how the police state, the Big Brother snooping surveillance state, and the snitch culture that pervades the United States is expanding everywhere, not just large cities like Los Angeles, New York, Chicago, but also small towns and cities all across the country, much like Marion, South Carolina. So we'll get into the article here. In yet another example of the Big Brother-style snitch culture being fostered and implemented all across the country, the city of Marion, South Carolina is now demonstrating how the oppressive surveillance state is no longer limited to large metropolitan areas and bigger cities already conditioned to living under the watchful eye of government. Now, even small towns such as Marion, with a population of 6,939 people, are getting in on the act. According to WMBF News, the Marion Police Department is launching a new program that allows citizens to report crimes via text message. The department's new text-to-tip program is scheduled to be operational by the end of September of this year. Much like the now infamous See Something, Say Something program being implemented by DHS in Walmarts, hotels, and other available television screens, the Marion Police Department is encouraging everyone to text message the number 843-430-0938 if they see a crime in progress or even so much as what they deem to be suspicious activity. And this term suspicious activity, that's very broad, that's very generic. It can be used to cover a whole wide variety of different activities that aren't really crimes or even suspicious, but in the post-9/11 world in 2012, where everyone is afraid of their own shadow and suspects their neighbor of terrorism, of some kind of crime, then suspicious activity has a very wide open definition. Back to the article. Unfortunately, one can assume that gangs of police preying upon the already economically destitute citizens of Marion day in and day out does not constitute reportable suspicious activity. After all, such has been the case in Marion for some time, as any unfortunate driver will easily attest to. As I was talking about the councils of governments a few weeks ago on this show, and on some various podcasts that I had done, I mentioned that the city of Marion, or actually Marion County, has one of the highest unemployment rates in the state. It's officially at 18%. Now we know the unemployment rate is usually double and slightly more than the official numbers, so you would think that the unemployment rate here in Marion County is around 36%. But yet, as you drive through Marion on any given day, you will have to run the gauntlet of Marion police, sitting around intersections, around curves, in parking lots, waiting for unsuspecting drivers to come by so they can pull them over and ticket them and generate revenue for the Marion Police Department. It's really disgusting. In regards to the launch of Text-to-Tip, Marion Mayor Rodney Berry stated, "This is just another option for citizens in our combined efforts to stop crime in the city of Marion. Together we can work to make Marion safer and to make a difference in our communities." Unquote. Regrettably, Mayor Berry's and the Marion Police Department's plan will do virtually nothing to keep Marion safer. However, it will undoubtedly increase the number of snitching incidents resulting from vengeful individuals looking for quick returns on their anger, or from otherwise nosy and frightful citizens whose paranoia is only increased by the incessant replays of police dramas and terror warnings paraded in front of them on television every single night. Text-to-Tip is yet another technological program, much like the recently introduced Crime Push and Patriot App smartphone programs, aimed at providing the general public with all the tools necessary to enslave themselves and their fellow citizens. The Text-to-Tip program is by no means unique to Marion, South Carolina, however. The fact is that low-tech programs of this type are becoming commonplace in cities in large and small cities all across the country. For instance, the cities of Springfield, Massachusetts, Evanston, Illinois, and Boston, Massachusetts have all implemented Text-to-Tip. Even college campuses like the University of Southern California have introduced the program, as well as high schools such as Pottsgrove High in Pennsylvania. In the end, Text-to-Tip is just one more snitch program to enable police to spy on the population they have sworn to protect and justify even more confrontations with individuals they would otherwise have no authority to harass. Undoubtedly, this program will be used by domesticated and terrorized citizenry to rat on their neighbors in yet one more embarrassing display of just how far the American people have fallen. If you would like to contact the Marion Police Department and or Marion Mayor Rodney Berry and express your dissatisfaction at the rollout of this new program, you can contact them using the following information. So here's the information for Mayor Rodney Berry of Marion, South Carolina. The phone number that you would call is 843-423-5961. Again, that's 843-423-5961. It's in the article, by the way. The fax number is 843-423-8620. The address to City Hall there is 107 South Main Street, Marion, South Carolina, 29571. And Marion Police Chief Jim Gray, 843-423-8616. Again, that's 843-423-8616. The fax number is 843-423-8604. His email is mpolice, M as in Marion, mpolice@marionsc.gov. The mailing address is 1024 South Main Street, Marion, South Carolina, 29571. Feel free to give these people a call or fax or send them a letter or an email and let them know what they're doing to society. Again, the number that the Text-to-Tip program uses is 843-430-0938. So, I would hate for that number to be used in any manner other than what they've asked it to be used for. Again, the article's Text-to-Tip snitch program invades small-town America. All that contact information, by the way, is located in the article. It's up at activistpost.com. And we're going to switch gears drastically here, and we're going to start talking about Greece and Spain. It's an article up at Bloomberg entitled "Madrid Protesters March Again as Spain Braces for Cuts" by Emma Ross, Thomas, and Ben Sills. The article reads, Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy meets ministers today to approve a 2013 austerity budget as protests in the capital and dissent from regional leaders deepen his predicament over seeking a bailout. Rajoy is vowing to cut the deficit by at least 18 billion euros, that's $23.2 billion, next year, defying tens of thousands of demonstrators who fought with police in Madrid this week to demand the premier reverse course and resign. Deputy Prime Minister Soraya Sáenz de Santamaría, Economy Minister Luis de Guindos, and Budget Minister Cristobal Montoro will brief reporters on the budget and a package of reforms at 5 p.m. in Madrid. Antonio Barroso, a political analyst at Eurasia Group in London and a former Spanish government pollster, stated, Rajoy is likely to face a very tough end of year in terms of social discontent. Protests are likely to continue in the future, and the overall degree of mobilization could increase if trade unions decide to call for a general strike, unquote. Of course, calling for a general strike by trade unions is exactly what they should do, and we hope that they do that. Back to the article. Rajoy is struggling to persuade European peers and investors that he can tackle the crisis. Spain's bonds have slumped as Rajoy's meditation on whether to ask for external aid stretches on. 3 people were arrested and 3 injured last night as demonstrators returned to the site of earlier clashes near the Spanish parliament. Rajoy told a conference in New York yesterday that the immense majority of Spaniards aren't on the street and he still has 3 years to overhaul the economy. The cabinet convened an hour later than usual at 11 a.m. This is talking about bond yields, Spanish bond yields. The cabinet convened an hour later than usual at 11 a.m. because the Prime Minister was traveling back from New York and the meeting is taking longer than usual due to the volume of material to be discussed, said a government spokeswoman who asked not to be named in line with government policy. Spanish bond yields, which rose by the most in 2 months yesterday, dropped 10 basis points to 5.96%, while the benchmark, the IBEX stock index, gained 0.3% at 2:12 p.m. in Madrid. Bank deposits fell 1.1% on the month in August, the Bank of Spain said today. European leaders are setting out their plans for the next phase of fiscal consolidation. The strains emerge in a blueprint for a closer financial union. Lawmakers and Chancellor Angela Merkel's coalition today urged the German leader to set hurdles to slow large banks' entry into a common framework. I should mention that this article was written September 27th, 2012. French cuts. All right, French President Francois Hollande will tomorrow set out plans to cut the deficit to 3% of the economy next year when he unveils his 2013 budget. In Greece, where police yesterday broke up an anti-austerity demonstration by firing tear gas into the crowd, Prime Minister Antonis Samaras wrung a deal from his coalition partners to back a 2-year spending plan. That may unlock further aid if Samaras can win the support of the European Commission and the other institutions tracking his progress. Rajoy's efforts to restore investor confidence and voters' faith in his leadership were set back on September 25th when Catalan President Artur Mas called early elections to push for self-determination for the country's largest regional economy. Rajoy hasn't responded to the challenge, saying only that he respects the regional government. Mas yesterday proposed a referendum on the region's future. Basque nationalist leader Inigo Urkula, set to claim the regional presidency in October 21st vote, said his party also wants to renegotiate its tax contribution to the central government and will push for more sovereignty. Now, clear fractures. Opposition socialist leader Alfredo Pérez Rubalcaba said yesterday in Parliament, Spain is increasingly slipping out of his hands. There are clear fractures in Spain, and the one I'm most worried about is social fracture. As Rajoy struggles to keep Spain on track, the outlook for the euro region is deteriorating. Economic confidence in the bloc fell unexpectedly in September, and at least 5 member states have slipped into recession. Even so, Italy's borrowing costs dropped at an auction of 5- and 10-year bonds today, distancing Prime Minister Mario Monti of Goldman Sachs, I added, from the problems facing Spain. The extra yield investors' demand to hold 10-year Spanish debt rather than Italian paper jumped to 85 basis points yesterday, the most in more than a week. The spread narrowed to 80 points today. Rajoy didn't mention Catalonia in a speech to the Americas Society in New York, where he focused instead on efforts to overhaul an economy that is suffering from its second recession in 3 years. He praised Spaniards who put up with austerity and hardships without protesting. They are the people who suffer, he said, who are seeing huge difficulties and face many problems. Rajoy said on September 25th he will create an independent fiscal authority following European recommendations. The cabinet will also approve a package of measures to jumpstart the economy that Economy Minister Luis de Guindos pledged to European peers earlier this month. While the government has already rewritten labor market rules, changed tax structures, and taken steps to reduce bureaucracy and regulation, the European Union and International Monetary Fund have called for additional moves to make the economy more competitive. They may be asked to accept deeper cuts today as the government presents a spending plan designed to reduce the deficit to 4.5% of output next year from 6.3% in 2012. That means 18 billion euros of spending cuts or tax hikes so long as Spain meets its target for this year. The central government budget shortfall reached 4.77% of gross domestic product in the first 8 months. Fitch Ratings said yesterday that regional governments may breach their limit of a combined 1.5% deficit as tax revenue slumps. The overall target also includes the social security system, which is strained by the 25% unemployment rate. Dolores de Cospedal, deputy leader of Rajoy's People's Party, said in an interview on Cadena Cope radio station on September 27th. We need to show that the Spanish people and the government are capable of balancing their books to restore confidence. Whether it's popular or not, that is what is necessary. Well, it's not popular, and it's not popular for good reason. I want to switch over to a Washington Post article that's entitled Greek Finance Minister, Coalition Heads Reach Basic Agreement on Austerity Package. It says, Greece's coalition government reached a basic agreement Thursday on a new round of harsh austerity cuts demanded by its international lenders. The measures, secured after weeks of fruitless efforts, had to be agreed or Greece would have been cut off from vital bailout loans that it needs to pay its way and keep it in the 17-country group that uses the euro. All of those things that I just read in that one sentence. There are so many things wrong with that one sentence. I don't know where to begin. The austerity measures had to be agreed upon for Greece would have been cut off from vital bailout loans. Well, this is absolutely ridiculous. Austerity measures are not vital. Austerity measures are the opposite of what should be happening in Greece. There's no such thing as a vital bailout loan in this context. Okay? They're not bailing out Greece, they're bailing out banks. Greece is in the situation it's in not because Greece necessarily had bad government debt. It certainly was not because they had strong social safety net programs. It was because they bailed out the banks. Sound familiar? It should. It's happening all over Europe and all over America, all over the world. It happens all the time. And this article also refers to the European Union as if it's heresy to suggest that maybe countries shouldn't be in the European Union. Maybe I would go so far as to suggest that there shouldn't be a European Union at all. And I think a lot of people would agree. But these harsh austerity cuts referred to by the Washington Post, and I guess the Associated Press here that reported it first, are absolutely, that they're fruitless in their own right. We all know that when you impose austerity programs, when you cut and gut an economic system, the deficits are bigger the next year. This is what's actually happened to Greece, and this is what's going to continue to happen as long as they do that. But that is the agenda. The agenda is not to bring Greece back up to its former living standards. It's not about fixing the economy per se. What it is about imposing austerity measures and lowering the living standards of the Greek people, while at the same time enriching the banks and corporations that are involved in it, and of course the government parasites as well. Back to the article. Finance Minister Yanis Stournaras said that the long-delayed agreement placed him in a stronger negotiating position ahead of talks Monday with representatives of the country's bailout creditors who have the final word on the cutbacks. He said Prime Minister Antonis Samaras' deliberations with the heads of his two junior coalition partners resulted in a basic agreement on the measures intended to act some $11.5 billion or $14.8 billion US dollars off state spending in 2013-2012. See the way they present this, because they present this as, oh my God, there's deliberations, there has to be an agreement. Whatever the agreement is, there has to be an agreement or the sky will fall. We won't get our funds. See, there's no talk about, is it necessary to get the bailout funds at all? They never mention that. They never will. But they repeat this in all media outlets that the sky is falling, that there has to be an agreement. There has to be an agreement. So, when they announce that you get a basic agreement, that there is an agreement to cut $14.8 billion of state spending, read austerity measures, the first thing in your mind is, great. Well, at least they reached an agreement. Thank God we have an agreement. The agreement is to screw you, by the way. Under its bailout commitments, Athens must also boost state revenues by an additional 2 billion euros over the next 2 years through tax reform and improved tax collection. That's raising taxes. The three-party meeting came a day after more than 50,000 anti-austerity protesters took to the streets of Athens in a demonstration marred by clashes between hooded anarchist youths and riot police. Now, see, this is biased to begin with, because while there may be some anarchists out there, not every protester who doesn't believe in brutal austerity measures is an anarchist. Let me ask you this. Why would an anarchist support increased state spending? I thought an anarchist would want the state out of their business. I didn't think the anarchist would want a state capable of spending billions of dollars of state money that they would have had to have taken from them under the current system. Wouldn't an anarchist support austerity measures? It's interesting. Greece has relied on international bailout since May 2010. In return, it imposed a punishing austerity program, repeatedly slashing incomes, hiking taxes, and raising retirement ages. The new measures are expected to include further pension and salary cuts and raising the age of retirement from 65 to 67. Oh, wait, I thought they had a very low retirement age. 67. It's not very low. Parliament is expected to vote on the cutbacks between October 8th, when Eurozone finance ministers meet in Luxembourg, and the October 18th to 19th European Union summit, a Greek government official said. He spoke on condition of anonymity, as he was not authorized to discuss the issue on the record. The government should easily win the vote despite fierce opposition from the anti-austerity parties and potential dissenting votes, as it controls 178 of the House's 300 seats. How did that Samaras vote go for you over there in Greece? Looks like the Greek voters voted for hope and change and got about the same amount that we did when that suggestion was given to us, when that option was given to us. Approval from EU, International Monetary Fund, and European Central Bank officials monitoring the country's 3-year effort to right its finances will allow the disbursement of 31 billion euros expected after mid-October. You see, the EU, the International Monetary Fund, and European Central Bank has no business in the private affairs of Greece anyway. It's a mistake to bring them in. The International Monetary Fund has a track record of zero success. With that money, whose payment was delayed for months after 2 successive national elections in May and June, Greece will complete the recapitalization of its battered banking system and pay off long outstanding debts to domestic suppliers. Without the cash, the country would have trouble paying its bills. That could force Greece to default on its debts and possibly ditch the euro. Again, I just have to point out that they're presenting this as if that's the only option. It's either beg from the IMF, the EU Central Bank, and private banks for the cash to pay off the debts that it owes to the private banks, or the sky will fall, Greece will default, and the euro will be dropped, and they'll perhaps be out of the European Union. But that's actually not a legitimate consideration that they would be kicked out. But all of this isn't true, because you see, there are things that you could do in this situation. Remember, Greece had a party. It was the Syriza party. Alexis Tsipras was the candidate. Did pretty well in the elections, but ultimately and unfortunately the Greeks went with more of the same. They went with the George Bush, Barack Obama, Mitt Romney cabal, their version of it. But Greece could have had a debt moratorium. They could have had a debt freeze, then enacted reforms based on that. They could have nationalized the central bank. They could have liquidated the zombie banks in Greece. They could have banned credit default swaps. They could have done all those things. Those were options. Because if Greece doesn't pay its debts to the private banks, well, I assure you that if Greece refuses to pay its debts on Sunday night, then on Monday morning, Greece will still be there. But Goldman Sachs won't be. You see, they know that. That's why there's such an effort to get the cash from the IMF, from the EU Central Bank, and from the Greek people to give the private banks. The Conservative-led coalition has been debating the new cutbacks for about 2 months, but a deal was delayed by opposition from the two center-left junior partners, coupled with disagreements with the EU, IMF, and ECB austerity inspectors. Again, what gives the EU, the IMF, and the ECB rights to go into Greece and inspect their economic condition? The austerity inspectors. Should kick these people out. Fotis Kouvelis, head of the small Democratic Left Party, said after Thursday's 2.5-hour talks that despite the overall agreement, some issues are still outstanding. And socialist PASOK leader Evangelos Venizelos said he would struggle to ensure that these measures are not across the board and are fair, and that they are truly the last, as Samaras has pledged. Every time they do this, they pledge it's the last. And then when they do it again and they do it again and the people get sick of it, the president gets voted out, some members of parliament or members of Congress get kicked out or voted out, and the new guys come in and say no austerity measures, and then they impose austerity measures, and then they say but this is the last time, and then they do it over and over again until they're voted out and members of parliament are voted out, and the new guys come in and say we won't impose austerity measures, and then they do it and say it'll be the last time. I could go on and on. You see where this is going. An article on France 24, International News, Greek austerity breeds new generation of homeless. This is the result of your austerity programs. Greece's harsh austerity measures and the subsequent rise in unemployment have forced a growing number of Greeks out of their homes. Our reporters went to a crisis center in the capital where desperate Athenians seek refuge, food, and medication. 2 years into Greece's devastating financial crisis, joblessness and homelessness are rife. For the first time, the middle class is having trouble making ends meet. More and more Greeks are finding themselves out of work, unable to pay their way, sleeping in their cars or even on the streets. Resembling a youth center or a backpackers hostel, the independent Klimaka Homeless Center is a rarity in Greece, where most non-state assistance is dominated by the church. Funded entirely by donations, even down to the soaps and televisions, the center is today busier than ever. People who have spent their adult lives employed and self-sufficient are now seeking refuge, food, and medication. Effie Stomatoyiannopoulou says, we see totally healthy people with an active working past sleeping rough. She's a nurse at the homeless shelter. Not only individuals but also families, she says, are turning up at the center in need of food and essentials. In the last month alone, demand has increased by around 20%. We're going to take a break here for station identification. We'll be back after this.
UCY.TV. The future is in your hands.
And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We were talking about Greek austerity and the rise in unemployment, the rise in homelessness in Greece, and we were reading about a nurse at the homeless shelter who was saying that they are seeing more and more families who had an active working past, but now they're sleeping in the homeless shelters because there's rampant unemployment. Spending has been cut, government spending has been cut, there's no aid for these people, they have trouble finding food. Austerity measures are being implemented, taxes are being raised. We went through that first segment. Back to the article. Lambros, an unemployed builder who had managed to get a bed at the center, has been homeless since February. He spent 6 months sleeping in his car before finding refuge at Klimaka. I have no reason to complain, he said. They take good care of me. But while Lambros is relieved to be getting help, he is also deeply ashamed of his situation. I don't want my family to know where I am now. It's such a low point in my life. I was another person when they saw me, and now I'm ashamed to even look at myself. The crisis has not only caused a rise in homelessness, but also in depression. According to a recent survey, 54% of Greeks now say they regularly feel depressed. A state-funded suicide prevention helpline reported in October that more than twice as many people called this year than in 2010, and 1 in 4 of them mentioned the financial crisis. Well, it's going to happen. When you can't afford food, you can't afford the basic necessities of life, your taxes are growing up, if you are lucky enough to be working, you're just spinning your wheels, you're spending all the time and energy that you have just trying to stay in the same place. If you lose your footing at one time, it's over. Then you'll be one of the people sleeping in the homeless shelter. At the Klamaka Center, a team of nurses, psychologists, and social workers welcome a stream of troubled Athenians each day. When our reporters visited, more than 50 people had already turned up before noon. George Bakouris, a 60-year-old unemployed radio technician who comes to the Center for Psychological Support, says he has experienced huge distress and suicidal thoughts since losing his job in public radio after 20 years of service. At my age, it's difficult to find a job at anything, he explained. For the country as a whole, Bakouris is far from optimistic. Greece, he asked, looking up to the ceiling. God help us. So we'll put that article up under the YouTube video. Hopefully we'll have it on the UCY Truth on the Tracks page. But as you read about these Greek people, the homelessness, the rife unemployment all over Greece, sleeping in their cars. You here in America you say that it sucks for the Greeks, but it's a good thing that happens in Greece and not the United States, right? Because after all, those people don't work hard like we do over here. You see, the Greeks are the Greeks are lazy. Remember, they retire when they're young. They have these exorbitant wages. The silly Greeks, the lazy Greeks. It's a good thing the United States never went into a depression. It's a good thing the recession is over, right? It's a good thing we're not like the lazy Greeks. Because if we were, we might have to go through austerity. And then we have to sleep in our cars and that sort of thing. Economic despair is beginning to spread rapidly in America. As you read this, there are millions of American families that are just barely hanging on by their fingernails. For a growing number of Americans, it has become an all-out battle just to be able to afford to sleep under a roof and put a little food on the table. Sadly, there are more people than ever that are losing that battle. Tonight, tens of thousands of formerly middle-class Americans will be sleeping in their cars. Tonight, tens of thousands of formerly middle-class Americans will be sleeping in their cars, even though it is illegal in many U.S. cities. Tens of thousands of others will be sleeping in tent cities or on the streets. Meanwhile, communities all over America are passing measures that are meant to push tent cities and homeless people out of their areas. It turns out that once you lose your job and your home in this country, you become something of an outcast. Sadly, the number of outcasts is going to continue to grow as the U.S. economy continues to collapse. Most Americans that end up living in their cars or in tent cities never thought that it would happen to them. In an article in Der Spiegel, one American couple was profiled and is obviously shocked at what has happened to them. And it quotes the couple. It quotes Der Spiegel quoting the couple. Chanel Saavedra is already on that road. She and her husband have been sleeping in their car for almost 3 weeks now. We never saw this coming. Never ever, says Saavedra. She starts to cry. I'm an adult. I can take care of myself one way or another, and the same with my husband. But they're too little to go through these things. She's talking about her kids. She has 3 children. They are 9, 5, and 3 years old. We had a house further south in San Bernardino, says Saavedra. Her husband lost his job building prefab houses in July 2009. The utility company turned off the gas. We were boiling water on the barbecue to bathe our kids, she said. No longer able to pay the rent, the Saavedras were evicted from their house in August. How would you feel if you had a 3-year-old kid and a 5-year-old kid and you were sleeping in a car? Sadly, if Child Protective Services finds out about that family, those kids will probably be stolen away and never returned. See, that's something else. This is me here. That's something else you'd have to worry about. In this country we have CPS, where if you're poor, you're an unfit parent. And they'll come and take your children. And they'll put them in the CPS, foster homes where your child is 7 times more likely to be abused, sexually or otherwise. But at least they're not poor, right? You should see some of these foster homes, by the way. America is becoming a very cruel place. Unfortunately, what has happened to that family is not an isolated incident. As rapid unemployment has spread across America, the number of people that have lost their homes has soared. Today, it is estimated that approximately a third of the homeless population in Seattle live in their cars. It is even happening to my readers. A reader named JD left the following comment on one of my articles a while back. JD says, I was laid off from my construction job almost 2 years ago, was on unemployment for over a year, and they cut me off last September, so I lost my apartment. Since then, I've been couch surfing and hotel hopping. Now I occasionally sleep in my car. I was lucky enough to have a friend with a lawn care business, so I can at least put ever-increasing gas in my car/house. I hate to say it, but I think we will see Hoovervilles in the major cities soon. When the welfare and food stamps and all the other government programs end, the anarchy begins. Desperation is rising all over America. Most people had hoped to see an economic recovery by now, but it just hasn't happened. The phenomenon of Americans living in their cars have become so prominent that even Time magazine has done a story about it. And I'll try to put that up under the YouTube video when it comes out. A quote from the article of Time magazine. For people who cannot afford rent, a car is the last rung of dignity and sanity above the despair of the streets. A home on wheels is a classic American affair, from the wagon train to the RV. Now, for some formerly upwardly mobile Americans, the economic storm has turned the back seat or the rear of the van into the bedroom. We found 6 people sleeping in their cars on an overnight police ride-along in December, says John Edmond, Chief of Staff to Long Beach Councilman D. Andrews. One was a widow living in a four-door sedan. She and her husband had been Air Force veterans. She did not know about the agencies that could help her. I had tears in my eyes afterwards. Unfortunately, it turns out that sleeping in cars has been made illegal in many areas of the United States because we're so free. In many cities, police are putting boots on the cars, and then when the homeless owners can't pay the fines, the vehicles are being taken away from them. Venice, California is one place where people have been arrested for living in vehicles. Venice had been a popular spot for people living in their RVs to go. But police started arresting people that were living in RVs, and they began towing away their vehicles. The following is an excerpt from an article that appeared on the Daily Cause website. They took Eric while he was changing his battery in his car, claimed he lived in his car. A few days later, they went to 3rd Street and took his RV because he was in jail, and no one moved it for 72 hours. Saturday, they did a sweep of 7th and took Bear and his RV. They also took Elizabeth's RV, but do not know if they took Elizabeth, but cannot find her. The police went to 6th and took the white RV that always parks by Broadway on 6th. Every day they take 1 to 4 RVs. Very soon there will be no more left. Once you are down on your luck in America, you will quickly find out that authorities will try to take everything else you still have away from you. It's very true. That was an article by the Economic Collapse blog by Michael Snyder. And again, we'll try to get the article up from Time by Kevin O'Leary, Last Refuge for the Homeless, Living in the Car. We'll try to get that up as well. Also, a Rolling Stone article that you might want to check out. It's quite a long article, so we won't get into it here. But it's by Mark Seliger, by Jeff Teitz. It's from Rolling Stone. It's called The Sharp Sudden Decline of America's Middle Class. We'll try to put that up for you as well, so you can take a look and see the effects of austerity here in the United States. But as you see all of the unemployment rise and the homelessness rise, as you see your neighbors be kicked out on the streets because they can't afford to pay their bills, their mortgage, health care bills, and whatnot, please remember the true cause of the economic condition. It's you, remember, because you're too lazy. Remember that. Remember, the Greeks were lazy. That's what's caused their economic situation. And you're too lazy. That's why there's no businesses. Your laziness drove away the businesses, just like the Greeks. Speaking of the lazy Greeks, this article from BBC brings up some of the statistics for the Greek workers. Let's take a look at that. Figures from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, show that the average Greek worker toils away for 2,017 hours per year, which is more than any other European country. Wow, that's crazy. Lazy people don't usually work more than others. Apparently the Greeks do. Out of 34 members of the OECD, that is just 2 places behind the board leaders, South Korea. On the other hand, The average German worker, normally thought of as the very epitome of industriousness, only manages 1,408 hours a year. Germany is 33rd out of 34 on the OECD list, or 24th out of 25 looking at European countries alone. Only one other OECD country's workers put in few hours, and that's the Netherlands with 1,377. The average Greek is working a full 40% longer than the average German. But that's certainly a lot different from what you hear in the mainstream media, right? Because the Greeks are lazy. They don't do any work. That's what you hear from the mainstream. And again, if you go to the International Group Program that was put out, the Summary of Social Security and Private Employee Benefits for 2011, you look at the statistics that they provide, and we'll try to put these up for you as well, and you look at the retirement age, because this is something else that you hear on the mainstream media. The Greeks have these luxurious retirement programs, these retirement ages. They retire when they when they get out of college, basically. Well, of course, they don't say something that ridiculous, but the mainstream media constantly prattles on about the young retirement ages of the Greeks. But look at the statistics here for the full old age pension here of Greece. The normal retirement ages and so forth is 65. And that puts Greece right in the middle of the European Union. Not the highest, not the lowest. It's interesting. It almost suggests that maybe the mainstream media is lying to you when it comes to the Greek economy and the Greek financial crisis. I'll say it again. The Greek financial crisis is not caused by a sovereign debt crisis. It's a banking crisis. It's a private banking crisis. It's not Greece, it's the banks. So anyway, we'll try to get those statistics up for you. Now, we all know about Mitt Romney's ridiculous gaffe essentially calling Americans lazy, or at least that's how it's been interpreted. I'll read his quote for you, because the Greeks are being told they're lazy, and apparently so are you. So Mitt Romney says, there are 47% of the people who will vote for the president no matter what. All right? There are 47% who are with him, who are dependent upon government, who believe that they are victims, who believe that government has a responsibility to care for them, who believe that they're entitled to health care, to food, to housing, to you name it. But it's an entitlement, and the government should give it to them. And they will vote for this president no matter what. These are people who pay no income tax. 47% of Americans pay no income tax. Now, we won't go into a long dissertation about all the things that are wrong with what Romney said, or the fact that he thinks food is an entitlement. But the idea here is, one could suggest that Romney might be saying that the American people have gotten lazy, that we're soft, that we're weak, that we expect governments to do these things for us. So, Romney bad, Obama good, right? If Romney's bad, then that obviously means that Obama disagrees with him, because they're so different. September 29th, Barack Obama. This is what Barack Obama had to say about Americans and the economic crisis. The way I think about it is, this is a great country that had gotten a little soft, and we didn't have that same competitive edge that we needed over the last couple of decades. We need to get back on track. And then on November 12th, this is last year. But we've been a bit lazy, I think, over the last couple of decades. We've kind of taken for granted, people will want to come here, and we aren't out there hungry selling America and trying to attract new business into America. It's your fault. You're lazy. Get that through your heads, people. You're the reason we are in the economic crisis. Right? You're the reason. It's your laziness. Because this is the agenda, by the way. It's to cause all of these economic problems, and it's to blame you. Because people have gotten dependent to some degree on these programs. A lot of people are dependent on these programs because they have nothing else to survive on. There are no more jobs. But the agenda now is to blame you, to blame your laziness, to blame your alleged laziness, to blame it on your social safety net programs, so they can impose austerity and destroy your living standards. Because remember, they didn't cause the problems, you did. They didn't sign NAFTA, send your jobs to South America. You did that. It's your laziness, remember. They didn't sign CAFTA, you did that. They didn't sign GATT, you did that. They didn't sign you on to the World Trade Organization, you did that. Your laziness. Your laziness shipped jobs overseas. Crumbling infrastructure, that's not the fault of the banks and the governments who are subservient to them, or the corporations that we've privatized these responsibilities to. No, that's your fault. It's not Federal Reserve policy. No, of course not. It wouldn't be the Fed. Again, that's you. It's not the austerity programs that they're bringing in to raise your taxes and cut your social safety net. No, you're just lazy. So shut up and get to work. You know, the government hasn't bankrupted the country with approximately 8 foreign wars. Again, that was you. Apparently, you did all these things. You signed on to NAFTA, CAFTA, GATT, the World Trade Organization, 8 foreign wars, and Federal Reserve policy, and crumbling infrastructure, and bad trade policy. You borrowed money at interest that you could have created on your own for free. You did that. It's all you. So there's an article here from MSNBC, and it's entitled, MSN.com. It's entitled, "Are American Workers Getting Lazy?" And this is by Anthony Miradari. And he says, "American workers have hit a wall. For years, productivity has been the U.S. economy's saving grace. I'm sure you've heard this line, sure, American workers cost more, but they're the most productive in the world. That's changing. For the first time since the recession ended..." We'll just move on. "For the first time since the recession ended, businesses are increasingly unable to squeeze more and more work out of existing workers. Work weeks have been maxed out. Manufacturers are increasingly turning to expensive overtime to fill orders. Yes, with corporate profits at record highs and millions still out of work, it's hard to feel bad for those in corner offices poring over resumes, but their job has gotten tougher. Rather than hiring from an eager, skilled, and educated reserve army of workers, recent data suggests that they're facing an emerging skills shortage. Labor productivity, a measure of how much work is done per hour, has plunged over the past 4 months, while labor costs have spiked toward pre-recession highs. The unemployment rate has dropped dramatically." Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we will ignore the comedic material for now, and we will move on with the article. "And yet wage growth has stalled." Translation: Companies appear to be hiring more less skilled and less motivated workers at low pay levels to get the same amount of work done. That's crimping profit margins and pushing inflation higher. At the same time, many qualified workers seem to be turning up their noses at jobs they see as demeaning or that don't pay what they need, and they are deciding to instead leave the workforce, trying to strike out on their own or retire. You can read these data suggest Americans are getting lazier, losing their skills, or letting them fall out of date, and choosing not to take jobs they view as beneath them. Or you could fault employers for not offering enough rewards to interest even the long-term unemployed. And then this guy goes into another rant about how lazy Americans are. I will spare you this ridiculous drivel, but just a few things bear mentioning. Anthony mentions, the MSN article writer mentions that businesses are increasingly unable to squeeze more and more work out of existing workers. Well, the horror that businesses aren't able to make workers work their fingers to the bone for virtually or absolutely no more pay. Work weeks have been maxed out. Well, why should you get a weekend off? So, corporate profits at record highs and millions still out of work. We're facing an emerging skills shortage. Well, why are we facing an emerging skills shortage? I don't remember any flight from the United States. The workers are still here. why are we having a shortage of skills? And then this ridiculous statement, the unemployment rate has dropped dramatically, and yet wage growth is stalled. Do I even need to address this? I probably do, but for those of you who are unaware, the unemployment rate has not dropped dramatically. The unemployment rate still hovers around a real unemployment rate of around 22%. The official statistics go back and forth between 8.6, 9.1, those kind of figures, but as I stated earlier, the real unemployment numbers are usually double and slightly more than that, because they don't count the people who are dropped off the rolls. They don't count the people who are they certainly don't count the ones who are underemployed, but they don't count the ones who dropped off the rolls, the ones who've given up, the ones whose unemployment benefits have maxed out. They only count the individuals receiving unemployment, and that's a vast understatement of the unemployment numbers. Now, Anthony writes again, companies appear to be hiring more less skilled and less motivated workers at low pay levels. If you got low pay levels, why on earth would you be less motivated? To get the same amount of work done. That's crimping profit margins and pushing inflation higher. Well, actually no, because Anthony says that they're hiring less skilled and less motivated workers at low pay to get the same amount of work done. So if you're getting the same amount of work done with less pay, then your profit margins should be going up, right? That makes sense to me. Apparently not in Anthony's world. But nevertheless, it is pushing inflation higher. It has nothing to do with Federal Reserve policy, right? Absolutely nothing to do with Federal Reserve. What it is that workers just aren't working hard enough. Again, we are seeing inflation because of the laziness of the American worker. So, if you just get out and work harder, prices will go down. Now, it says that American workers are turning up their noses as jobs they see as demeaning. I haven't seen any of that. See, I live in the real world, and I know people who are unemployed. I've been unemployed. You don't turn your nose up at jobs that are beneath you. But apparently Mr. Miharati here thinks that we're supposed to compete with the Chinese workers. No, that's impossible. That's impossible unless you want to lower your living standards down to the level of the Chinese workers, who have such great working conditions that they have to put up nets around some of the Apple buildings because the workers keep jumping out of the buildings to kill themselves to get away from the building, from the factory itself. They just had riots over there because the Chinese people couldn't take it anymore. Getting frisked on the way out of the Apple factory to see if they stole a stupid iPod as they worked their lives away. They finally got sick of it and had riots. Good for them. But apparently, as Marathi says here, this data could suggest that Americans are getting lazier, losing their skills, or letting them fall out of date, and choosing not to take jobs they view as beneath them. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. What jobs? But there's no need to argue with the likes of Anthony Marathi of MSN. We'll put that article up for you to have a laugh if you want to hear some ridiculous statements made regarding the U.S. economy, the unemployment situation. But in the remaining time that we have here, I want to go back to Greece. I want to point your attention to two more articles. Actually, one is a brief article summary. The other is it's also a radio show of World Crisis Radio by Webster Tarpley. If you go look, Greece's Syriza left bloc 5-point program for austerity, rollback, union and worker rights, democracy and social justice, punishment of banker felons, and debt freeze, a benchmark in the worldwide struggle to break the power of the 1%. After reading that title, I think you should probably just wait until we post it up under the YouTube video or on the UCY Truth on the Tracks page. But I'll also draw your attention to one more that we'll go over here in the remaining minutes while we can over some proposed solutions. An article by Yanis Varoufakis Open letter to a good friend and colleague who happened to become Greece's finance minister yesterday. This was written on June 27th, but it's still relevant today. We won't go over the whole thing. We'll just pick some of the more important aspects of the plan here in terms of solutions. This is from the blog The Greek Perspective, The Nation State Fights Back. You can find it at thegreekperspective.blogspot.com. It's run by Michael Chiotines, a very astute commentator on Greek politics and the economic situation in Greece right now. But the article reads, in accepting the position of finance minister, you accepted two gigantic challenges. The first one concerns, naturally, your forthcoming talks in Brussels on bailout MK3. The second challenge is the task of internal reforms, a set of policies on which you have been particularly vocal over the past few years from your position of head of IOBE think tank. Regarding the second task, everyone is watching you from the sidelines, eager to see how you will implement the reforms that you have been arguing in favor of for such a long time. All eyes will be on the manner of the implementation as well as on their impact, with your predictions of large positive effects on the Greek GDP at stake. You know that you and I disagreed on the likely effect and relative significance on the particular reforms that you have proposed. However, this disagreement is neither here nor there. What concerns me the most is that you may never get a chance to implement your reforms in view of the accelerating derailment of the euro locomotive and its immediate ill effects on Greece's capacity to become governable again before your ministerial career is over. To put it bluntly, success in your first gargantuan challenge is a prerequisite for even getting an opportunity to come face-to-face with your second challenge. So let's concentrate on the first challenge, negotiations with Europe. Yanni, the time has run out for prolonging the bankruptcy and extending it into the future by means of longer repayment periods and even greater loans. Bailouts NK1 and 2 in the final analysis were nothing more than exercises in gaining time until some solution was found at the European level. You and I disagreed on the wisdom of this strategy. Alas, our disagreement is now academic. This is because a third bailout, a bailout MK3, will not gain us significantly more time as the sand in Eurozone's hourglass is running out. You will not be given more than one or two opportunities to address Econfin. It will be a major waste to use them up in order to seek looser terms, more loans, repayment extensions. If these are the gifts that you return to Athens with during the summer, history will bestow upon you the cruelest and most unfair punishment ever exacted. The person who did so much and with such great passion to get Greece accepted into the Eurozone will be condemned to sit at his Syntagma Square office and watch helplessly as Greece is leaving a disintegrating euro. Can you stop the rot all by yourself? I know not. But I shall make a point of conjuring up optimism like that which typifies you to table some thoughts on that which needs to be done. You must bind the Europeans to one or two moves that will deter any thoughts of Greece being chucked out of the Eurozone within the next few months. Keep in mind this was written in June. Moves that will at the same time help shift the Econfin agenda in ways that may help avert the impending Euro destruction. Which moves? We're going to have to go quick here, we're running out of time. Seek no new loans, even though you know perfectly well that the coffers are empty and the timeline of Greece's repayments is well and fully and truly off track. Instead of loans, propose that the money that went into Greek banks, the so-called recapitalization program, does not count as part of Greek national debt, and in exchange, the EFSF retains common shares of these banks in proportion to the money it placed into them, while the ECB takes it to itself to supervise the said banks, even wind them down in an orderly fashion if they need be. Once the crisis is over, the ESFF can sell these shares at multiples of the purchasing price, thus ensuring that the European taxpayers get their money back. Then it goes to move 2, where it talks about some other things we're not going to have time to get into tonight, but you should check this out. Again, this has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We hope to see you next week.
UCY.TV. The future is in your hands.